I woke up that morning to the smell of coffee drifting through our quiet suburban house, the kind of place where you'd think nothing ever goes wrong. My name's Marcus Reynolds, and I'm a software engineer. Good at my job, steady, trustworthy. It's been enough to keep me, my wife Linda, and our 17-year-old kid Caleb living comfortably. The house is small yet nice, with a big oak tree out front and a backyard where Caleb used to bounce a soccer ball around when he was younger. Things seemed tranquil on the outside, like one of those gorgeous family portraits you see in a frame at the store. But inside, well, that's a different tale. Linda and I had been married for nearly 20 years, and any love we started with had turned into something cold and distant. We stayed together for Caleb, though. Our boy was the glue holding this wobbly thing together. That morning, I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee and browsing emails on my laptop. Caleb was across from me, eating a bowl of cereal, his black hair falling into his eyes as he focused on his phone. He's a quiet kid, contemplative, with a head full of music and stories. Stuff Linda never fully understood. She was in the next room, getting ready for work. Linda's in finance, always proud of how she can manage money better than anybody else, especially me. She'd remind me of it every chance she could, like it was some kind of trophy she'd won. I didn't argue much anymore. It wasn't worth the fight. Then her phone rang, loud and sharp, cutting through the morning quiet. I glanced up as she answered, her voice brightening the second she heard who it was. Rachel! Hey, how's everything? She put it on speaker, like she always did when her sister called. Rachel's voice rang out, loud and happy, filling the kitchen. April just earned another academic honor. Mom and Dad are over the moon about it. I saw Linda's chest swell with pride, even though it wasn't her kid who'd done anything. April is Rachel's daughter, our niece, and she's always been the golden child in this family. Straight A's, perfect test scores, the works. Linda responded like April's successes were hers too, like she'd somehow had a hand in raising her. Caleb didn't say anything, just kept eating his cereal. But I caught the way his shoulders slumped a little. He was used to this by now. Linda comparing him to April, making him feel like he didn't measure up. I hated it. My kid's got talent. Great talent. Just not the sort Linda cares about. He creates songs on his guitar late at night, and I've read some of his writing, profound, wonderful stuff that makes you feel something. But to Linda, if it's not grades or money, it's not worth anything. I flashed him a little smile over the table, trying to let him know. I see you. I'm proud of you. He stared back at me, his eyes softening a bit, and I knew he understood. Rachel kept talking, her voice humming through the speaker. Oh, and by the way, Mom and Dad want to have dinner soon to celebrate April's award. Yeah, and they said we'll talk about some important financial matters too. My stomach twisted the second I heard financial matters. With Linda's family, that never meant anything good. They were the type to gather around a table and scheme how to extract every penny out of a situation, especially if it meant appearing better than someone else. Linda was smirking, imagining whatever idea they were cooking up, but I could feel it coming. A problem, like a storm gathering over the horizon. I placed my coffee mug down a little harder than I meant to. The clink loud enough to make Caleb glance up at me. You okay, Dad? He asked, gently. I nodded, forcing a smile. Yeah, bud. Just thinking. Linda hung up the phone and walked into the kitchen, her heels clicking on the tile floor. She didn't even look at me, just poured herself a cup of coffee like nothing was wrong. Rachel says April's going to some expensive awards event next week, she said, her tone smug. Isn't that great? I didn't answer right away. Just watched her. She didn't. Noticed Caleb sitting there. Didn't see the way he stared down at his bowl, like he wished he could disappear into it. Yeah, I said finally, my voice flat. Real amazing. Linda shot me a glance. But I didn't care. I knew something was wrong. something bigger than just another family dinner, and whatever it was. I had a bad feeling it was about to hit us. Hard. I locked the door and turned to face them, crossing my arms. "Guess this couldn't wait," I said, leaning against the wall. Linda walked down the stairs, her hair pulled up tight, her eyes still burning with the wrath from last night. She must have called them over, set this little ambush up while I was sleeping. She stood next to her mom, arms crossed, mimicking me like we were squaring off. "That money belongs to April," Margaret growled, her voice harsh and stern, like she was scolding a toddler. I arched an eyebrow, keeping my cool even though I could feel my temper bubbling under the surface. "No," I stated, slow and clear. "It belongs to Caleb. Always has." Rachel came forward, throwing a hefty folder onto the coffee table with a loud smack. "We've consulted lawyers," she said, her tone dripping with confidence. "You had no right to move that money, Marcus. It's not legal." I glanced at the folder, then picked it up, flipping through the pages. Some legal jargon, a few highlighted lines, nothing that seemed pretty solid. I chuckled, a low, dry sound that made Rachel's smirk falter. "This is useless," I said, flinging it back onto the table. "The funds are in a trust, locked up tight, all done by the book years ago. You've got no case." Linda's fingers clenched, and I could see her jaw tighten, but I didn't flinch. I'd known they'd attempt something like this someday, and I'd made damn sure they couldn't touch it. Ed adjusted his spectacles, looking at me like I was some problem he could figure out. "You think you're smart, don't you?" he said, "keeping it behind our backs, behaving like you're above us." I shrugged, matching his stare. "I don't think I'm smart," I said. "I just know my son deserves his shot, and I wasn't going to allow you to steal it from him." Margaret exclaimed, clutching her pocketbook like I'd insulted her whole family tree. "We were trying to do what's best," she said. "April's got a real future. Colleges are begging for her. Caleb's just, well, he's my son," I cut in, my voice hard now. "And he's got a future, too. You don't get to decide it's worth less than hers." Linda eventually spoke, her voice low and tight. "We'll see about that," she said, moving closer. "You think you've won, Marcus, but I'm not done. I'll find a way." I stared at her, truly looked at her, and for a second, I almost felt sorry for her. She was so wrapped up in winning, in proving she was right, that she didn't even realize what she was losing. "Yes," I said, nodding slow. "We will." It caught her off guard. I could tell she'd expected me to argue, to yell, but I wasn't giving her the battle she wanted. Not yet. Rachel scooped up the folder, clutching it to her chest like it was still worth something. "This isn't over," she said, echoing Linda, although her voice seemed less sure now. I didn't bother answering, just watched as Ed and Margaret exchanged a look. One of those tight, anxious glances they often had when things didn't go their way. "We'll be in touch," Ed added, like it was some major threat. And then they turned to leave, pouring out the door with Linda trailing behind them. She flashed me one last glance before walking outside, and I heard their car start up a minute later, the motor dying as they drove off. I stood there for a second, letting the silence settle back in, then headed to the kitchen and grabbed my coffee again. It was cold now, but I drank it nonetheless, resting against the counter. Upstairs, I heard Caleb's door creak open, and his footsteps came quietly down the stairs. He looked into the kitchen, his hair untidy from sleep, his eyes wide. "Was that Grandma and Grandpa?" he asked. I nodded, placing my mug down. "Yeah," I said. "They're not happy, but it's all right. Nothing's changing." He bit his lip, looking at the floor. "They're really upset." "Yeah." I walked over, putting a hand on his shoulder. "They can be mad all they want," I said. "You're still going to college. That's what matters." He looked up at me, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. "Thanks, Dad," he said, and I could hear the relief in his voice. I smiled back, ruffling his hair a little. "Go have some breakfast," I said. "We've got a day to get through." He nodded and walked to the fridge, and I watched him for a minute, feeling the silent pride sink into me. Linda and her family could hurl whatever they wanted at us, attorneys, threats, guilt trips, but I'd created that trust for Caleb, solid as a rock. They weren't getting through it. Not today, not ever. I finished my coffee and washed the mug, ready for whatever came next.